Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Sales Chats, another episode. This is John Golden. I'm Chief Strategy Officer and Marketing Officer here with Pipeliner CRM. I'm in San Diego here in the US, lovely bright morning. Martha is in a little chillier Vienna there. Martha Neumeister, our social media guru at Pipeliner. And we're joined by Jermaine Edwards, who's in Southeast London in the UK. So welcome, Jermaine.
Yeah, thank you, John, and Martha. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen Sales Chat before, just want to give you the format. It's 30 minutes, it's rapid fire. We deal with one subject. We have a few questions. We go down into those. If you're watching, please tweet in your questions. Martha will interrupt us if people have interesting questions. Today, we're going to talk about customer relationship, and given the fact that Pipeliner is a customer relationship management system, it's a great subject for us, and we're going to be very interested in what Jermaine has to say as well on that subject. So I want to give a quick intro to Jermaine. Jermaine is a much sought after key account growth author, speaker, and strategist. That's quite a combination. Spent about 10 years on large account sales and sales management, selling millions of services to 17 different industries. He's trained thousands of sales teams and leaders across 8 countries. And now he really helps people with account growth. And he was just telling us he's in the middle of helping save a really large multi-million dollar account for one client. So welcome, Jermaine, again.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to diving in.
Yeah. Okay. Customer relationship. It means different things to different people. So how about you start off by giving us your definition?
Yeah, so I guess a true customer relationship for me is kind of an acknowledged and expected commitment based on mutually seen value. So I guess the principle behind that is that it's understood and acknowledged on all levels within both businesses, yours and the customers. So there's no confusion around how you work together and the best ways to deal with challenges, problems, and opportunities.
Okay, so let's dig into that a bit. So you say mutually understood. So that jumps out at me immediately, because one of the things I would say, one of the areas that there's a breakdown often is that there's maybe different or misconceptions or different perspectives on either side of that equation. So how do you get that mutually shared vision?
Yeah, it starts with setting expectations right from the beginning. So oftentimes we just don't think about these differences of how we build relationships together. So the first question is to ask to your customers, how do you build relationships with your suppliers? How do you build relationships when it comes to making decisions on big challenges that you have? How do you deal with relationships when in hard times? When you have disagreements? And once you have that kind of understanding of where they come from and the baseline for how they do relationships, you can align those things and ensure that you have a mutually expected understanding to how you work together.
So I like that idea. So basically what you're saying is you sit down with your customer and you actually explore these issues up front, and you say, what's your expectations? How do you resolve conflicts? Are we on the same page? I mean, that seems like very valuable advice. But sometimes when somebody's engaged, a selling organization's engaged with a brand new customer, sometimes they're kind of reluctant to push things too far and get too far into. So how would you advise them? You advise them to be a little bolder at the beginning?
So I advise them to take the leap first. I think when you're asking somebody to be vulnerable and share how they build relationships, it can be perceived as risk to begin with. So the first thing to say is really to kind of share your viewpoint and frame where you want to go with the relationship. An example of that would be literally just to frame and say, hey guys, just want to let you know that this is how we intend to work with our customers. We believe in these types of things in regards to building relationships, and I want to get your opinion if you believe the same thing. So you can begin first. Okay,
that's good advice. But do you find that customers are maybe a little wary or jaundiced, or maybe because they've had previous experiences with other vendors, that they may look at that and say, oh yeah, these are just words? So how do you build that trust that it's not just, you're not reading off your script of here's what we say to customers at the beginning to make them feel good? How do you build that kind of trust?
Absolutely. So, I mean, trust is on a continuum, and the reality here is it actually doesn't belong to us. So, everybody has what I call kind of different trust triggers, things that they're looking for within the person to be consistent and congruent with their own expectations. So, I think one of the key things to trust to begin with is to make sure that you deliver on what you say. So actually just being consistent with the things that you say. So once you say something that is around, I guess, a relationship value, whether that's, we believe in empathy, I mean, whatever that looks like, just make sure that you're consistent with it and that you have a really clear view of what that looks like on a weekly basis for your business in the selling process, in the customer management process, within each department that you work in or the customer has a touch point in. And if they receive consistency in that area, you're likely to build trust much faster.
So how do you deal with, when you talk to organizations, because I know a lot of organizations, particularly on the sales side, are very good on customer acquisition and they understand how to do that really well. But customer acquisition and customer relationship are not the same thing. So how do you educate sales leaders and salespeople to understand the value of the customer relationship as opposed to just customer acquisition?
Well, I've often tell the story of the bank manager and his mother. And the whole idea here is that, a prospect goes into a specific meeting, and in the meeting, they're supposed to be discussing a really, really important deal. But then the bank manager gets a call from his mother. And his mother says, I need you to be here at this specific time, or I need you to stop the deal, and I need you to come to where I am. So the bank manager stops the relationship where it is, stops the conversation, and then goes to his mother and spends that time with his mother. The prospect then calls him up the following day and says, hey, can we rearrange the meeting? But what the bank manager says is that he needs to prioritize his mother. And so what I often say is, are you the mother to the customer? Meaning that if they had something important to do, would they, in the sphere of relationships, see you as somebody as important, not to quote unquote, as their mother? Because we all have those specific situations where you may be kind of pitching for a specific deal, but even though you're the better customer or the better kind of company, you lose it out to somebody's best friend, or you usually lose it out to a particular relationship. And so I often kind of give those examples because we're also reciprocants to that, but we're also benefactors to those things as well. So if we choose to make relationships a competitive advantage, it's choosing to make the question, how do I build relationships with this person or customer on a weekly basis, more important? And if sales leaders begin to ask that question on a weekly basis with their teams, all of a sudden those relationships become a metric. And it's not now assumed that relationships are being built just because you're having a conversation. So once it's becoming a metric, then sales leaders are asking, how is this specific relationship going? How do we know? What kind of things are you talking about? Then all of a sudden you start to really kind of build a new way of thinking about how you sell and the value of what you sell in that process, because you want to protect the value and investment that you have in the relationships. And you don't protect the value of those relationships by building better products. You do that by building and deepening and having better relationships.
So those are great points. So here's another challenge I see that a lot of organizations face, or customers face, actually. Let's take it from the customer point of view, is that you deal with one person or a group of people when an organization is selling to you. And then maybe the deal is over, you're passed on to implementation. So implementation goes, and then maybe you're passed on to customer success, or maybe it's a support organization. And before long, you've been interacting with lots of different people along the way, and you're not sure, you don't really have a relationship with any one person or any group of individuals, and you feel that, yeah, they were great when they were selling to me, but now that they've sold to me, I've just been passed on. I mean, I'll give you an example. I remember one just clearly stood out for me. I remember buying a car some years ago when I was living in Northern California, and the sales guy was fantastic. He was, during the process, I was like, oh, this is a great guy. And after I got the car, it developed this rattle, right? And so I called back up, and I called him up and I said, oh, it's got a rattle. And the guy was just, yeah, let me put you through to service. And that
Wow.
was it. He never spoke to me again. And I know those, car dealerships is a bit of an extreme example, but I think a lot of us often feel like that and carry those kind of experiences with us. So how do we do that, given the fact that obviously an individual salesperson can't handhold a customer forever? How do we still make sure the customer feels like they have a relationship and they're not just being passed from pillar to post?
Yeah, so I think it does go straight back to expectations and communicating that really clearly with the customer. So if you've already have a really clear view of what that map or journey will be like once a customer comes on board, or once they're inside your customer system, then I think it's your responsibility as a sales rep to walk them through that process in its entirety, to say, this is what your experience, this is where we sometimes have some challenges, this is where we'll support you if you have that challenge. This is the person that you'll get to speak with at this particular point in time. I'll be there, at this stage and at this stage, based on this type of need that you may have, and really kind of walking them through that. So I truly believe that one of the big things that we need to commit to, particularly as salespeople, is ensuring that our customers feel safe. They feel secured and managed well. And if you can make them feel safe right at the beginning, then when the potential challenge or whatever occurs, at least they've been informed that it will happen before it begins.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that's an absolutely critical piece that you just touched on, the idea of keeping the customer feeling safe, because I always feel that there is a journey, an emotional journey that a customer takes, right? So first of all, they're investigating, your product or service, and say they decide to buy, right? They're excited, they're excited to buy this product. Now, once they sign on the dotted line and they go over, suddenly, I think everybody gets a little bit of trepidation starts to creep in, and particularly. What often happens is when you buy the product, and then say you're buying a product, and you buy the product and you bring it into your organization, suddenly you become associated with that product. So therefore you start to feel a little bit vulnerable, because now everybody, if the first time there's an issue with the product, everybody's going, hey, yeah, you brought the product in, what's going on here? And so you can then feel very vulnerable, and that's when maybe you can turn on the vendor because you're feeling vulnerable. So how do you deal with that kind of emotional roller coaster that a purchaser goes through?
Well, I mean, this really comes with intelligent selling right at the beginning, and this is a challenge, and it's not kind of bedded into our natural culture. But what I often try to do at the beginning of the process is to understand the influences or the people that impact the people I'm speaking with. So if I know that the main buyer or the person holding the main part of the responsibility has some level of pressure that's being there through my exploring and through my questioning, I'm going to make sure that I understand how I can support them in that influencing process with that communication to the business. So I'm not going to leave them to their own devices to try to figure out how to communicate what I'm sharing with them to the business. I'm going to be with them through that process in that communication, or at least bring people with me from my business to ensure that happens at the highest levels possible, so that that person doesn't feel like they're taking all the weight or burden of having to deal with the process. And I think if you can do that, as well as of hand-holding through the process, I think that makes for really intelligent selling and good account management.
Yeah, I really like what you just said there, because I think it's that idea of equipping your buyer. It's almost like giving them internal marketing is something that a lot of organizations overlook, and that's providing your customer with the tools to market your product within their organization. So let's talk a little bit about so sales leaders. What do they need to do to change in order to be more customer relationship oriented? Because again, a lot of sales leaders are people who were salespeople, came into sales leadership, and particularly if they were aggressive hunter types, kill it, move on. How do you get that customer relationship culture embedded there?
So I think it begins with understanding that you're responsible for what you see. So I think I truly believe that you behave what you see. And so if a sales leader is not leading from that place of being relationship centered, then it's unlikely that he'll get a culture that is representative of that. So I think the first thing is a leader deciding to make relationships an important metric in the business. And I mean, there are really clear metrics, financial metrics that are there for making relationships at the center of their conversations, but they need to prove that for themselves. And I think sometimes, we need to convince ourselves that it's a good idea. And with a sales role and the sales leader, they're often pressured, with the numbers, and nobody really cares how they get there, but they don't really think about the right route to get there. And the right route to get there, for me, in my opinion, is having relationship at the center of how you sell. So I think it starts with leading by example, and then putting relationship as a metric, and then asking different questions. So in those coaching conversations is adding those relationship-based questions into the conversations, those coaching moments with their teams, to get the psychology and the framework of thinking different, being thought differently with those specific teams. So it starts with leading, then putting relationships as a metric, and then putting those questions into those coaching conversations. That's it for me.
That's fantastic. So you've obviously worked with a lot of organizations, and this is something that you're very passionate about. So can you give me a couple of examples of organizations that do this really well and how they do it? And then maybe a couple of examples of where organizations you came into were not doing it well and what you did to change that.
Yeah, indeed. So I can definitely talk for a company recently. I can't necessarily mention their name because we're kind of in this but a small business in the technology space. So I say small business, they've got about 200 employees. It's not quite small, but they're doing this really well. And so one of the examples of this, particularly from the relationship side, is that every single sales meeting, the sales manager, the first 5 questions he will ask to his team will be about relationships. So he'll ask, one of the questions he'll ask will be, what one thing can we do this week to deepen and benefit the relationships that we have with our customers? Or 2, what one thing based on our relationships this week might get in the way of us moving this sale forward? Or what other relationships within the business have we not paid more attention to that's blocking the way we do sales or the sales cycle? So you'll ask 5 really big relationship-based questions, and that gets the whole team in a very different frame of reference to how they might use that particular choice of relationship to move a sale forward. I think that's a really powerful step. And he's literally found in a team of 20 different sales reps, literally almost 90% of them activating this thought mentality, this mindset of relationships, and seeing literally sales cycles cut in half simply by relationship-based strategies. And I'm about to actually release a blog on this next week to actually demonstrate some of the things that they're seeing. But that's just one example of just one specific discipline that a company is using to embed this customer relationship thinking.
Well, I mean, I think anybody would agree that if you can cut your sales cycle by 50%, that's something that we'd all love to do. So the power of relationship. So can you tell me, what are some of the examples you've seen of maybe organizations that were sabotaging, maybe unintentionally sabotaging customer relationships? And what are some of the pitfalls that you'd advise companies to avoid, or some of the signs to look out for?
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, quite recently, a customer I'm speaking to today who's, on the verge of really almost kind of losing a really big customer because of the lack of focus on relationship. And I think part of the challenge is oftentimes we can put in too many layers of complexity into the onboarding of customer relationships, of customers that are in our business. And then nobody owns the process, or nobody knows who actually owns the customer at different stages, and nobody takes responsibility. So I think one of the big hurdles that people need to think about is who owns the customer throughout the journey. And I think if you can understand that to begin with, then at least you have a reference point for understanding, what strategies you need to put in place, where the resources actually go, and who needs to be spoken to, and what kind of collaboration is needed within the organization. So
So yeah, so
Trust
I
is,
think,
go ahead.
no, sorry, we just lost you for a second there,
Oh,
but
sorry. Yes.
yeah. So I think that one of the key things that you outlined there is process, right? And journey, right? So defining the customer journey and then layering in the process for who does what at which stage, and so everybody is clear about
Absolutely.
about their role. Now, we're a process-driven company ourselves, and we build pipeline or CRM to enable process and to do it very simply. Uh, but I think, and you've this, and I'd be interested to see if this has been your experience. But again, I think with sales, often they will perhaps define a sales process by which they acquire the customer, but after a sales process, not defined so well. Is that an experience that you see?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a bit of an epidemic, actually. It's kind of everywhere. Even in the most mature kind of companies, you see it. I'm not too sure what the main problem behind that is. I mean, they're clearly kind of very intelligent guys, doing things, but I think we just get caught in the day to day, and we miss the things that matter most. And when we miss the things that matter most, we do everything poorly after that, and it's tough to break the chain. So I think just going back to basics, I think, is a really important discipline. And a sales leader and sales team, management team, is really thinking, where can we maximize or simplify the process for our customers and for the sales team as well?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've written a little bit on, and I talk about regularly, is that we live in this instant shortcut culture where everybody expects everything right now, and it doesn't matter kind of what day of the week it is, what time of the day it is, or night. We expect everything instantaneously, and customers, and as consumers, we've become, very high maintenance, and so we have customers now with an expectation that because everything is digital, etc., that I should get service immediately, and this is a challenge. So how do you adapt to a culture where people have, maybe, because I know we talked about setting expectations earlier, but where people have these kind of unrealistic expectations that everything will always be taken care of immediately?
So I think we almost have to retrain our customers, is what it is, because they've been trained by the subscription industry to really kind of have this behavioral leakage, of wanting to expect things at a moment's notice. And so I think it's our job, ethically and responsibly as organizations, to retrain our customers, not to expect less, but actually to expect better quality at a reasonable time.
Yeah, I love that. I love that concept of retraining the customer and expecting quality as opposed to just instant response times. So how do you go about that retraining? How would you, if you were brought in tomorrow to an organization, how would you advise them to go about resetting customer expectations and retraining the customer? Because let's face it, we're not the easiest to train, right?
No, not at all. So I think it begins with getting the whole organization on board, from understanding so where are all the touch points with the customer, and actually having one message driven through the process. And eventually what happens when you have one message consistently driven through a process is that the customer eventually concedes and thinks, okay, I get this now. This is what they do. This is who they are. This is how they do things. They're not trying to take anything away from me. They're trying to increase the quality, and now I just have to adhere by it. So it's about having a consistent message, and it's about being patient enough with your customer and empathizing in their retraining.
Now that's great, a great insight and advice, because I think it is critical, because otherwise the expectations are getting so out of whack, and we're just all expecting everything so immediate. So let's switch gears a moment for the last couple of minutes here, and just talk to me a little bit about what makes for the best kind of relationship seller. So this is about relationships. We talked about relationships. So if you're helping advise on recruitment, what do you look for in a relationship seller?
So I think it really kind of begins. So for one thing is that I don't believe that there are relationship sellers. I just believe there are salespeople who are relationship minded. So I don't personally believe that there's going to be this one type of person who's a relationship seller. I think we all have all these different qualities. But in terms of the qualities of relationship-centered thinking, I think I'd be looking for somebody who has, deeper levels of empathy and looking for those areas. I'd be looking for people who ask questions about, how do we look after our customers? So I'm asking intelligent questions about the customers, and somebody who has a clear view of what it means to really account manage. So I'll give you an example. Do they, in the recruitment process, if you ask them the question, what does the first 6 months look like when you manage a customer? And the first thing they say, or one of the first of three things they say is, I look to figure out where the relationships I need to be at in order to have within the first 6 months. So I think that's a good indicator for me.
So that's great. So basically you're looking for salespeople who've thought this through and have actually embedded it into their daily work practice.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're coming up at the end of our half hour, which has flown, obviously, as usual, because it's just such great content, and this has been fantastic. I really enjoyed this conversation, Jermaine. One of the things that we always like to ask our guests is, okay, so your power tip. What is the one thing that you do every day when you get up to set yourself up for success for the day?
Actually, I started doing a Wim Hof breathing technique. So Wim Hof is a guy he's called the Iceman. And he's basically the only one on the planet that can right now control his body temperatures in kind of -°C. So he can literally walk in just shorts through the Antarctic. And he has this beautiful kind of breathing exercise, which helps you to kind of reset the body and gets your mind that kind of in peak condition. So I do that for about 5 minutes in the morning, and that kind of resets the clock.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's one of the more interesting ones that we've gotten on this series, Jermaine. So that's fantastic. So before we finish up today, why don't you tell people how they can get in contact with you and just elaborate a little more on the kind of services that you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Jermaine Edwards, and you can find me at jermaineedwards.com. Find me on Twitter at JSA-Edwards. And yeah, if you want to really talk about how you can accelerate the relationships and profitability of your current key customers, then I'm definitely somebody you should have a conversation with. And you can obviously get hold of me, email jedwards@jermaineedwards.com.
So that's fantastic today. So I got some great takeaways from that. So setting expectations with customers, laying out the process for how you engage with customers after they become a customer. These are things that you really should be looking at in your organization to see, because the upside of having really good customer relationships, obviously there's long-term customer value, but there's also, as you said, the one that I wrote down here, the particular one is like, cutting your sales cycle by 50% is something that I think anybody listening would love to do. So we're at the nearly at the end. Martha, do you have anything to add? Any Twitter, any tweets, any comments?
Yeah, an interesting tweet. So how focusing on customer relationships could bring value to a customer. How to present that value in customer language.
Okay, so if I can repeat the question just briefly. So I guess, how does the customer relationship bring value to the customer?
Right.
Yeah, and how do you present that in a language that the customer understands?
Okay, all right. So that's pretty easy. So if I'm speaking to a customer and I want to reframe this as value, then for me, it's about the intimacy piece in Charles Green's Trusted Advisor. So the closer I can be to the customer, the better I can understand them, and the better results and value I can bring. So the choice for me in words is the customer relationship point of view that I have is there to enable me to understand you better and therefore deliver high levels of value for your business.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Anything else, Martha?
Nope.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. And again, thank Jermaine Edwards. This has been fantastic, joining us from London today, from Southeast London.
Enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. We'll have another sales chat coming up soon, probably in the next couple of weeks, Martha, am I right?
Yes, you're right. 17th of November.
17th of November. So look at the events page on Pipeliner Sales to keep up with this. And again, Jermaine, this has been fantastic. Delighted having you here today. And I think customer relationship, customer focus is a subject that so many people are going to get great value from.
Absolutely. Much appreciated. Thank you, John.
All right. See you, Martha.
Bye.
See you later, Martha. Bye-bye.